We've got a three-way tie atop the Ivy League standings with 3 games to go, and 2 of them colliding in Cambridge on Saturday. It's Columbia against Harvard. It's week 8 of the John Poppy Coaches Show. Coach, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for the time. Let's start with a recap of a great win last Friday night at home against Yale, 13-10. Everybody talks about the Cole Freeman touchdown pass to Bryson Canty. I want to rewind the tape. I want to talk about the play right before that, which I thought was a huge turning point. Griffin Johnson on a 3rd and 7. I'm sure they're anticipating maybe a pass. You run him, he bulldozes through for 17 yards. How critical was that play, and what does it say about what Griffin brings to the table in addition to Georgie and Terry?
Yeah, incredibly critical play there, and it's a great job of sequencing plays, that whole drive by Coach Saitu and the rest of the staff, and we're in multiple tight end sets and running the ball pretty much 100% of the time during that drive, and we switched personnels to get Yale thinking pass, right, to a 3 receivers personnel grouping, and Coach Saitu called the play, and the offensive line, and Griffin executed, and that's where Griffin's energy and freshness really showed up, right, hitting that seam and just putting his head down and kept his legs churning, and that's what allowed us to the next play, take that shot to Bryson.
How much is that strategy in terms of how you utilize Griffin? What I mean by that is he had 41 rushing yards. That was a career high. But really the bulk of his work, to your point, John, came late in the game as opposed to utilizing him maybe more throughout the first half. So how much are you saying, hey, close game late, we can now throw in a fresh back against a defense that's a bit worn down?
Yeah, I don't know if it was Griffin's plan per se, or even us planning to use Griffin in that way, just the way the game flow worked, right? First half, had 2 possessions on offense, that was it. And then you have Malcolm Terry's ankle kind of get a little tweaked. And so Griffin was the next man up with Joey being a little bit tired. And he maximized his opportunities and helped us win a game.
I was going to give you some additional credit, but we're going to play the modesty game here on your Coaches Show. In all seriousness, then Griffin is part of a key block to allow Cole Freeman to get 19 yards to run out the clock. Yale had already utilized its 2 timeouts. What message does that send to the rest of the team about you can make an impact even when you're not the primary ball carrier or you don't have this sexy or flashy play in which your number is called for?
I think it's just a testament to the program and how we're investing our time in everybody, right? And not just the guys that are performing on Saturdays, but the guys that are helping our team perform on Saturdays. And everyone is getting developed and coached in our scheme so that way when the number's called, you're seeing the results of that. And that's really what I'm most proud of, and I think our staff is most proud of, and our team is most proud of, is that when your number's called, we're ready. And that's why we're not crying that our players are hurt. Whoever's out there is going to play great football.
Well, it's the old cliche, next man up. I think you've been preaching that and been showcasing that. And speaking of that, Cole Freeman, he leads the way with 82 rushing yards. And we talked about when you lose a guy like Chase Goodwin, what does that mean for your offense? But we've seen Cole's mobility. We've seen his legs. So how much was the Yale performance an example of how you didn't lose a whole lot, especially in terms of the mobility factor for the player under center?
Correct. Cole can do anything and everything we need our quarterback to do in our system. And Cole's ability to extend plays and have second and third effort type plays really shows with his toughness and grit. He can make every throw. As you saw, the deep ball to Bryson was right in stride, right where it needed to be. And even some other throws in that game, reading the safety. When safety came downhill on the run, he hits the post behind, right? And so we're really confident in Cole, and he's proven us right so far, and he just continues to get better and better every week that he's running our system.
The other element that was on full display, of course, was the complementary football aspect, which we've been talking about. The defense making critical plays. Jack Smahowski, Ben Cornello with the sack to force Yale to have to give you the ball back, and you decided we're not going to give it back. But after a rough performance that we talked about the other week against Dartmouth, when they ran for over 200 yards, how impressed were you with the way the defense turned things around off of a short week?
Yeah, I don't think the defense ever lost confidence, right? I think they remain confident in their abilities, and as coaches, right, we just had to be smarter with our calculated risks, and that's where you saw that pressure show up on 3rd and 10, forcing that sack. And the guys just did a great job tackling. That was really, I think, a big difference between the Dartmouth game and Yale game, is that in the close space, the one-on-one opportunities, our defenders made the plays. And that was something we focused on all week long and continue to focus on, is the team that tackles the best usually wins. And so the guys did a great job executing in that space, and that's why we limited them in some of those chunk plays minus one run by Pitzenberger where it seemed like he broke a tackle of all 11 guys out there, and we just second effort got him down.
Yeah, you didn't see a lot of those explosive plays, to your point. I mean, maybe in the 20 territory, 1, 2, and that was critical, and I think making it a grinded out type of affair, which you've proven if you keep the game close, your team has been well calculated with respect to that.
Exactly right. And that was, in our opinion as coaches, the way the game was hoping to play out. Right? We wanted to shorten the game. We wanted to limit their possessions because of how explosive that offense can be, and that's something we're going to have to do again this week, is control the line of scrimmage, control the football, and see what happens in the fourth quarter.
Well, that is a perfect segue to tease what's coming up next as we look ahead to the matchup against Harvard. Both teams 3-1 in league play. We'll step aside. When we come back, we'll break down Harvard and what to make of this intriguing matchup in Cambridge on Saturday. As you're watching the John Poppy Coaches Show on GoColumbiaLions.com. Lance Meadow back here with you on the John Poppy Coaches Show. It's week 8. It's Columbia against Harvard in Cambridge on Saturday. We now look ahead to this matchup, and both teams coming in with identical records. I want to start, of course, with your connection. I know maybe the team hasn't been reviewing, John, your resume, but it's hard to overlook the fact 2 stints as an assistant at Harvard, and if I have my facts straight, you crossed paths with the offensive coordinator and the defensive coordinator for the Crimson. I know you're very knowledgeable about the Ivy League, but on a personal level, how much does this maybe add a little bit more to the ante for you this week?
I think it's just exciting, and nothing but respect for those guys up there as men, as people, and as coaches, and it's just fun to compete against people you have a lot of respect for. And so, provides a little more juice maybe in my, my bones on Saturday, but in the grand scheme of things, it's up to 2 teams to perform and execute.
Well, when you look at the statistics, we're talking about the 2 best scoring defenses in the Ivy League. Harvard, number 1 in scoring offense. They're averaging 34 points per game. With that being said, you just went up against one of the best offenses in Yale. How much do you think going up against Yale and what your defense tackled prepares you even more so for what Harvard is going to present?
I think Harvard's a little different animal, just because of their personnel groupings and because of the quarterback. And nothing against Grant Jordan, he's a great player and he's going to go on the rest of the season and perform well. But Jaden Craig is a different animal in my opinion, so to speak. And he does a great job of extending plays, and when he's in the pocket, he's comfortable as well. So, we're really going to have to do a great job of creating pressure and then also not allowing him to escape. He's playing at a player of the year level in my opinion, and he's got weapons on the outside. Guys that can take bubble screens and go, and guys that can take a vertical ball and go. So we've got to be extra aware of our spacing as defenders, right? And making sure we're rallying to the football, and also making sure that if we have a deep responsibility in coverage, that we're there.
Well, I'm glad you hit on his statistics because, John, they jump off the page. 18 touchdowns, that's a league high. Just 2 interceptions. Beautiful TD to interception ratio. I don't need to convince you. You've been an opportunistic defense, though. Why has he been so effective, Craig, in protecting the ball and making good decisions this far in terms of what you've seen on film?
Well, that's exactly right. He's making great decisions, right? Whether it's in the pocket, out of the pocket, he knows when to throw the ball away. He knows when to take the risk, and he really puts the ball a majority of the time where only his player has a chance to get it. And you're really just seeing the confidence level rise and rise and rise each week. With coming from the UNH game, I think he was under 50% completion percentage, but they hit a lot of explosive plays. You've seen kind of the confidence really start to strike here week in and week out, and they're rolling right now, and we got to do everything in our power to just mix it up on them and change the picture, and going back to our pass rush being extremely important.
Now, one of the weapons that you were alluding to is Cooper Barcade, who actually is the only receiver ahead of Bryson Canty in receiving touchdowns, tops in terms of receiving yards and receiving scores. How much do they feed off of what he presents off the line of scrimmage and down the field? And how much do you have to walk a fine line in saying we need to give him attention, but at the same time we can't overemphasize just looking to shut him down?
Yeah, I think it's very similar, right? They have Cooper Barcade, we have Bryson Canty, and if you go 2 over 1 to either of those guys, their supporting cast, if you want to call them that, start to take advantage of that. Scotty Woods, Seamus Gilmartin has started to come on late as one of their tight ends. You got Caden Oderman, who had some big time catches in that Dartmouth game. So, again, it just goes back to changing the picture on Mr. Craig as much as we can, and in hopes that he makes a poor decision or we fluster him and he has to throw the ball away if he's not going to throw it into coverage, right? Like really, we just have to find ways to get them off track.
Interestingly, they just played Dartmouth, who you recently went up against, and that was a game in which, John, they trailed by 10 points 2 separate times, overcame it, scored a touchdown late. I know you just went up against a Yale team, which also showed that they can get into offensive clinics, but what specifically did Harvard's performance against Dartmouth show you that you're just reminding your team about, especially based on how the ebbs and the flows of the game could play out?
They can strike quickly. And just like we're resilient, so are they. And that's really what I think you see in Dartmouth too. You got 3 teams who are so resilient in their efforts and their execution and have complete faith that the game is never lost, right? That there's always a chance we can come back and win this thing. And that's why we have to play a complete 60 minutes and execute for all 60 minutes.
The other number that I wanted to ask you that jumps out to me, your team's been well disciplined, but Harvard actually only has 19 penalties on the season. That's best in the nation, and their average is not too shabby as well. Is this a sign and example of this team doesn't award gifts to the opposition, John, from what you've seen, and you really got to take it from them and earn it, as opposed to them, for the lack of a better phrase, laying out the red carpet treatment for you?
Correct. They're not shooting themselves in the foot by any means, right? Their run game is very smart. Their running backs do a great job of not putting their offensive line or their run blockers in predicaments in terms of getting holding penalties. Their defenders, have done a great job of not being overly grabby, right, in the pass game, and their D-line hasn't made any silly decisions when it relates to the quarterback. So they're playing really, really clean football, and we've got to bring our A game.
Now, speaking of decision-making, before we wrap up, normally travel's not a big part of the dialogue between the two of us because the trips have been manageable, but this is your lengthiest road trip. How do you tackle the longevity of the trip with respect to going to Harvard this week compared to what you had to overcome on the road over the course of the first few games?
And just trying to stay as close to routine as we can. So we'll leave here at an appropriate time in the morning and making sure we're up there and then get the guys rolled out and stretched and moving a little bit just to get that bus ride out of them. And then we'll go into our film and meeting sessions and wake up in the morning, get ready to go.
Sounds like a game plan. The numbers of the weeks increase, the games get bigger by the week. John, I don't need to remind you about that. Always a pleasure, and best of luck this weekend. You got it. Absolutely. It's Columbia against Harvard. This is the Week 8 edition of the John Poppe Coaches Show. Game will kick off at noon Eastern, and you can watch on ESPN+.